Hey, it's Mazzy, and these are the three best bands of the 21st century, showcasing their most adventurous records. Their three most adventurous records. Do these records, do these artists have anything in common? The only thing is, they all started in the 1990s, but from my point of view, they really got their land legs and their creativity just switched on at the turn of this century. Now, by saying this, by even making this video, you have to know without me saying that this is my opinion. This is based on my taste. So I'm not going to say that. But three albums by the three greatest artists of the 20th century on display. Starting with a band who I really like, and I don't talk enough about on my channel, and two of my, I would say two close friends of mine who are in the vinyl community, make videos. This is amongst their favorite band, and that band, of course, is Wilco, okay? They know much more about the day-to-day, week-to-week, hour-by-hour specifics on Wilco than I will ever. And those two are my friend John, Digital Gramophone in North Carolina, and Chris, the Long Cut in San Jose, California. So I urge you to go to their channels. I'll put links to their channels below if you want to know anything and everything about Wilco and the bands associated with Wilco. That's the place to go. But this is an album that really secured my love for this band. Now, I did follow Wilco somewhat before, but to me, they were always another one of those group of bands, the alt country mix, obviously with offshoots and of everything from Uncle Tupelo to the Jayhawks, and the side projects of all those bands, which I'm not going to get into. And they made several albums, obviously, before they made this album. And this album stands out. This is their fourth album, Yankee, Hotel, Foxtrot. And this became sort of an infamous record for a lot of reasons. They were on Reprise Records, and Reprise went through a bit of their own turmoil, I guess around 2000, when they laid off a bunch of people. Some new people were brought in, and the A&R people heard the tape that Wilco had made, this album, and they just turned it down. They turned Wilco down. They didn't get it. You know, in hindsight, it's easy for all of us to say, yeah, you know, how stupid were they to turn this amazing record down? Now, what I will say is when you first listen to this record, if you were used to the Wilco records before this, and even somewhat after this, this is unique in it to itself. It's avant-garde, it's flashes of brilliance, flashes of initially like, what the fuck is going on here? It's very atmospheric, as are all three of the records I'm showing here. It came after Summer Teeth. So after this, they kind of regrouped. They fired their drummer because their drummer didn't seem apparently to latch on or keep on with the new material they were doing. The meandering in some ways. This is not a commercial record whatsoever. There are pieces, there are songs definitely like Heavy Metal Drummer that has, you know, catchy, and it could definitely be a single. A couple other tracks here, but this, in a way, is an alt-country, avant-garde masterpiece. And this is something that I really got Wilco. They finally captured something in my musical brain. There's so much ambiance in this record. Jeff Tweedy really, you know, had a somewhat of a vision, and it flows together and pieces together. Some of it is very out there for the time. Some of it is scratchy noise sound that is like an interplay joining the tracks together. Now, again, Warner Brothers Reprise turns this record down, and they eventually buy the record back, or it was given back. I think in the end they got it for free after some negotiation, and they shopped it around, and they ended up going to Non-Such Records. Non-Such Records had been, going back to the 60s and 70s. They had the Non-Such Explorer series. They were Adventurous, World, field recording type things. They were essentially a budget label when I first heard of Non-Such, a division of Warner at the time, Reprise. So they're in the same group as Reprise Records in a way. But over the last, 20 years, they also do a lot of 25 years, a lot of 20th century music, Kronos Quartet, John Adams, Steve Reich. But also they started signing a lot of older acts who were still doing interesting things. Randy Newman, Laurie Anderson, Emmylou Harris, who did one of her more adventurous albums. They got what this was about. So in a way, I kind of get that Reprise just didn't get it. But of course, they dropped a digital version of the album out. I think people streamed it, and they got more hits than ever on their site. And this was, again, a new time in music dispersion, music streaming in a way, or before we had music streaming, and people were able to listen to this album, and it became this infamous record. So end of 2001, they were about to put this record out. People started hearing it. The the CD didn't come out till, I think, April in 2002. And it became this infamous thing. It was written about that the record that Reprise Records couldn't handle, and it got very infamous. And the big bad record company turns down the artistic endeavors of a band. Next on my list is Kid A by Radiohead, one of the top 3 bands of the 21st century, one of the top 3 best bands of the 21st century. Another adventurous album. Now, again, they had their biggest album to date just prior to this in the late 1990s, and that was OK Computer. This was on best of lists, mostly in the UK, but also in America. This was considered their masterpiece. This was guitar-driven Britpop with arty, electronic overdubs and effects. And this was considered just a tour de force, a major work. And I remember reading probably in Mojo magazine about this album. It was their #1 album, I believe. And so that's when I went out and got it. So I didn't jump in early on. I had heard the Bends, I had heard, Fake Plastic Trees, and those first albums, guitar-based. And as good as I like those albums, I love those records, they didn't really stand out amongst a lot of the other bands, aside from Tom York's voice. But when they put out this album, Kid A, from the first electronic pulse of that track, everything in its right place, and the singing on that, no guitars, all electronic. I clung on to this album. I was attracted to this album. I remember in my office in San Francisco, putting this CD on, and I played this song. I stopped and played this song maybe 10 times, a lot of times, over and over again. There's something about it just swirled through my ears. I was on a meager system in my office, but I just turned this up and blasted and fell in love with this record. Now, and this was a record too I had in my car all the time, and my son, who would have been 11 at the time, just fell in love with this record too. This is one of the first new records at the time I remember Joseph getting into the same time I got into it. And of course, that's something really wonderful to share. Now, this came out in 2000. The cliche on this record is they threw away their guitar-based sound and did everything electronic. They were very influenced by Kraftwerk and all the German, thumpy-thump electronic tweaky bits and bots records, which is true. They were just so enamored by Kraftwerk, and that's a lot of influence from Kraftwerk went into this record. Johnny Johnny's guitar playing and his classical arrangements are a big part of this record. When you get into the national anthem, there's a really heavy guitar riff that goes throughout that record and some just great repetitive drumming to it. There's so much really in that song. I think, is it Idiotech? That's a very electronic one. How to Disappear Completely is probably the most ethereal, beautiful song of this album, with Tom York's stunning vocal on here. Optimistic, is that the track? There's one track that again is heavy guitar that mixes in these horns and orchestration that is like a free jazz freak out that just gets really, if you put a punk band mixed in with free jazz, that's what you'll get. But there's so much on this album. There's so much beauty on the album. Toward the end, you get motion picture soundtrack with this beautiful also vocal. It seems like it could be the closing credits. There is a little bit of a piece of music, secret song at the end that's very short. But everything on this record is just stunning. Electronics, just a gorgeous record and one of the most important records. Now, this was going to be a double record. They wrote so much music. It almost became a double record, but it just was too much for, I think, for them as well. It really changed things for them to cut it up and to put out a second album 8 months later. And Stanley Donwood did the cover art here, as he does for this album. This was a follow-up and the rest of what was recorded during these sessions. And this is Amnesiac was the album. This is actually recently, in the last year for an anniversary, they put out a new mix, a new combo album that joins Kid A and Amnesiac, and it's Kid Amnesia. And that's the double take on both these albums combined. In essence, what might have been with this album. But I'm glad they split it up. I think this would have been too much together when this came out at the time. But again, one of the most beautiful, adventurous albums of this century, of the 21st century, and one of the top 3 bands of the 21st century. And the third most adventurous band of the 21st century and their most adventurous album is Rings Around the World by Super Furry Animals, a band from Wales, a band that should have been more popular in this country. They had hits throughout the UK and parts of Europe. And this, to me, is their masterpiece. This is an album that came out in July of 2001. This followed this album. This is their 4th album. So of all these 3, their 4th and 5th albums, does that mean anything? Is that a coincidence? 4, 4, and 5. This album was the only album they did to that time that's all sung in Welsh. And I'm not gonna even try to pronounce that. We all know about Welsh. Anyway, this was the album they did. And then, of course, they do this. And this, I'm gonna say this is a masterpiece. This album also has the distinction of being the first album to come out simultaneously with a DVD, a 5.1 surround mix. And what was brilliant about this, right at that time in 2001, I just set up my first and only 5.1 setup, with perfectly set up in San Francisco, big screen TV. I no longer have it, and I got this. And I advise, and I suggest any of you who are into 5.1 and have a 5.1 setup, seek this DVD out. It's the most amazing, beautiful, bombastic at times, 5.1 surround mix I've ever heard. You know, there's a lot of 5.1 now, these bands redoing it and producers remixing prog and other psychedelic stuff 5.1 after the fact. This was recorded with that in mind on this version of this, and the graphics are fun and there's lyrics, and I blasted this a bunch, and I would have a 5.1 just for this. After a while, the novelty of all the other 5.1 stuff fell off for me musically, and here in Seattle, the way my setup is, I no longer have 5.1. But this is a gorgeous record. It's an unusual record. In essence, it's a pop record. There are really beautiful pop songs there. And there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of layers, heavy production. It's rock and roll pop. It's psychedelic, Beatle influenced. It's post-punk, it's punk, it's power pop. There's elements of soul, like 70s soul. It's got prog and a little bit of metal mixed in, a little bit of doom metal mixed in. It's got a lot of Beach Boys influence in there with amazing harmonies and gorgeous soundscapes, electronica. There's stuff buzzing through your head, but in essence, it's the songs that are brilliant. They're hysterical. The lyrics are so funny. It opens up with alternate route to Vulcan Streets. It sounds a little slow and it bursts into this beautiful metal melody. Sidewalk Surfer Girl, again, just swirls through your head. Rings Around the World, again, is another one that just spins it off and just comes at you. And as soon as it gets going, it just doesn't stop. And it's very catchy. Every song on here, after you've heard this album several times, is extremely catchy. And I was fortunate enough to see him 3 times after this came out within within a year and a half, I think, 2-year period. And 2 out of the 3 shows, one at Bimbo's, which is a kind of a cool little club in San Francisco, and then at the Fillmore, a later show, but within that same year and a half, they brought in their surround system where you literally had speakers around the theater, and you would hear this 5.1, this surround swirling thing, like it's usually, we hear only at Avengers and Star Wars theaters and IMAX theaters, but it was amazing. And these electronic sounds are just zinging through your body and just really beautiful. It's not the end of the world. I mean, there's a certain prophecy, there's a certain doom of some of the songs there, and there's a certain sense of humor. Respectable for the respectable. Now that song has the interesting tidbit of that. Paul McCartney is on it, chewing on a carrot and celery. And if you don't know what that's about, let me tell you right here. On the Beach Boys album, one of the Beach Boys songs, Paul McCartney is on doing the same thing. Biting a carrot, chomping on a piece of celery. So they brought him in. I mean, you would never know it's Paul McCartney. I think John Cale's on a cut on here as well. Juxtaposed with You is that soul song that's very 70s, Barry White, and it's hysterical. And it has the string arrangements of a 70s soul, Barry White style song, and it's just amazing. Now, Run Christian Run is an amazing song about Christian television in America, and it's great lyrics again, a great arrangement, so much going on in these songs. But I'll just mention one other song on this album, and that's Presidential Suite. And what's hysterical about the lyrics, and if you weren't paying attention, you just think the fun, the beauty, and pop sensibilities of the song would just be another pop psychedelic song. And what that song is about, Presidential Suite, it's about Monica Lewinsky giving a blowjob to Bill Clinton. And follow the lyrics because they're hysterical. So this is perfection, pop perfection, a lot going on. What I will say about all these records, all 3 of these records, there's a lot to dive into. There's a lot of stuff going on. Every time you listen to these records, you'll hear something different. So I'm a big fan of these 3 very adventurous records of the last 25 years and from the 3 best bands of the 21st century. So check them out. Yankee, Foxtrot, Kid A, and Rings Around the World. Have I succeeded to spark your interest? Mazzy loves you.